It was cold that night, colder than usual, the kind of cold that doesn't just touch your skin, it reaches deeper into the parts of you that you thought were already numb. I remember watching the steam rise from my breath and thinking that maybe it was the only proof I was still alive. The fire beside me had turned weak, flickering like an old man's memory, and the streets were quieter than ever. That's when I heard her voice. It wasn't a cry for help. It wasn't even a scream. It was something softer, fragile, like a secret not meant to be heard. She said, "Please, don't let them take me back." Those words came from the alley next to the bridge, where the shadows stretch longer than the nights themselves. I didn't know who she was, but I knew that tone. It was the sound of someone who'd already lost everything. I turned slowly, my knees aching as I stood. The city lights were too far to touch us down there, under the bridge, where the world forgets names and faces. I could barely see her at first, just a shape in the dark, curled up against the wall. When I got closer, I saw her eyes. They weren't afraid. They were tired. The kind of tired that comes after years of running from something that always catches you in the end. "Are you hurt?" I asked. She didn't answer. She just pressed her hands against her chest, like she was holding something inside, something that didn't want to stay quiet anymore. Her coat was thin, soaked from the rain that had fallen earlier. Her shoes didn't match, and her lips were trembling, not from the cold, but from the kind of pain words can't describe. I wanted to walk away. People out here, we learn not to get involved, because every story you touch sticks to you, and I already had enough ghosts whispering at my fire, but something about her made me stay. She looked up at me and said, "You don't remember me, do you?" I frowned. "Should I?" She smiled faintly. "Maybe not. People rarely do." Then she coughed, a deep, dry cough that shook her whole body, and when she tried to breathe again, it sounded like glass breaking. I kneeled beside her. The ground was wet and cold, and I could smell the iron in her breath. She had a bruise on her neck, fading but old, and her hands, they were covered in something dark, blood or dirt. I couldn't tell in the dim light. "Wait here," I told her. "I'll find someone. I'll call for help." But she grabbed my wrist with surprising strength. "No," she said, "please, just stay with me for a while." Her voice cracked on the last word, and in that moment, I realized she didn't want saving. She just didn't want to die alone. So I stayed. I sat beside her against the cold concrete wall. The firelight from my camp danced faintly in the puddles, and the city hummed in the distance, indifferent as ever. She looked at it like someone who once belonged there, but no longer had a ticket to return. For a while we didn't speak. The silence between us wasn't empty, it was full of everything that didn't need to be said. I thought about how many people must have passed over that bridge tonight, just a few meters above us, without knowing that a story was ending right here, below their feet. Finally, she whispered, "I used to come here every day." "Here?" I asked. She nodded weakly. There was a bakery across the street. I worked there. Used to smell like sugar and cinnamon in the mornings. Her eyes softened, like she was looking at a life that wasn't hers anymore. I'd watch people walk by. I thought I knew their faces. Thought I mattered. I didn't say anything. Some memories don't need answers, they just need space to breathe. Then she said something that chilled me more than the wind ever could. "I saw you once, sitting right there by that fire. You were talking to yourself." I almost smiled. "I do that sometimes." She looked at me with faint amusement. "I know. You were telling a story about a boy who gave you his coat." I froze. That was months ago. That boy was gone, and I never told that story twice. "How do you remember that?" I asked. She shrugged weakly, "Because I listened, and because it was beautiful. Then her eyes filled with tears, and she whispered, "Nobody tells stories about people like us." The rain started again, soft at first, then steadier, washing over the pavement like a quiet apology. I took off my blanket and draped it over her shoulders. It didn't help much, but it was all I had. She smiled faintly, almost embarrassed. "You shouldn't waste it on me." "It's not wasted," I said. "You're still breathing." She looked down. Not for long. The way she said it, it wasn't fear. It was acceptance. Like she'd been walking toward this moment for years and finally stopped running. I could hear the sirens in the distance, far but getting closer. I hadn't called them, but someone must have. Maybe a passerby. Maybe fate. Sometimes the streets choose who gets found. She turned her face toward the firelight and said, "Do you believe people deserve second chances?" I hesitated. Sometimes, even the ones who hurt others. I thought about it for a while before answering. Especially them. She closed her eyes and nodded, like she was testing the weight of that answer. Then she said, almost to herself, "I never told him I was sorry." Her voice trembled on that word, sorry. It lingered in the air between us like smoke, heavy and slow. I didn't ask who him was. I didn't need to. Some words already come with their own ghosts attached. The sirens grew louder. Blue and red lights began to dance faintly on the wet concrete walls. She saw them too, and sighed. "They're coming." "Good," I said softly. She shook her head. "No, you don't understand." And her eyes filled with a kind of panic I hadn't seen before. "They'll take me back," she whispered. "Where?" I asked. Her lips trembled. "The hospital, or the place before that." "I can't go back there." Her breathing grew shallow. Her fingers tightened around mine, cold and trembling. "I need you to promise me something," she said. "Anything. When they get here, don't tell them my name." I looked at her, confused. "But they'll want to help you." She smiled, a sad, tired smile that broke something inside me. "Not everyone who comes to help is trying to save you." The ambulance turned the corner then, headlights cutting through the mist, siren crying like an old warning. She looked at me one last time and whispered, "Please, just remember me like this. Not what they'll say about me later." Then her grip loosened, her hand fell from mine, and her gaze turned distant. I called out, but she didn't answer. The medics ran toward us, their voices sharp and urgent. I stepped back, the fire behind me flickering in protest. They covered her with blankets, put something over her face, spoke in codes I didn't understand. And I stood there, silent, watching as the world took her away, like it always does. As they lifted her onto the stretcher, I heard one of them say a name. I recognized it, a name I'd heard on a small radio weeks ago, during the news about a woman who escaped from a psychiatric ward after being charged with something terrible. But I didn't say a word. Not when they asked me what happened. Not when they asked who she was, because I remembered what she said, and I made her a promise. So I just said she didn't tell me her name. They looked at me for a moment, maybe trying to read if I was lying. Then they nodded and closed the doors. The siren faded into the night. The bridge went quiet again. I sat back down by my fire. The blanket she'd used still held her warmth for a while. Then, slowly, it cooled like the city around me. And I realized, once again, that sometimes the hardest part of living out here isn't the cold, it's the remembering. The night after the ambulance took her, I didn't sleep. I just sat there beside the dying fire, staring at the spot where she had been. The city never really sleeps, but sometimes it pretends. Every few minutes, a car rolled over the bridge, the hum of its engine echoing through the concrete. and I wondered if anyone inside those cars had ever heard their own name whispered the way she said hers, like it was already fading. Morning came without light. The sky was the color of old metal, and the smell of rain clung to everything. I wrapped the blanket around my shoulders, still damp from the night before, and watched the street awaken. Vendors setting up carts, people walking fast, heads down. None of them looked under the bridge. They never do. I thought about the name the paramedic had said, Mara. I'd heard it before. The radio, a voice trembling through static. A woman charged with taking something that wasn't hers. They never said what. Only that she'd escaped, considered dangerous. I remember laughing when I heard that word, dangerous. Everyone's dangerous when the world decides they are. That afternoon, I walked to the bakery she'd talked about. It was still there, though the windows were covered in dust and old flyers. The sign above the door was cracked, the colors fading, like everything else in this city. I stood there for a long time, watching my reflection on the glass, thinking of her words, "Nobody tells stories about people like us." So I decided I would. I went back that night with a small notebook I'd found weeks earlier in a trash bin near the station. Most of the pages were blank, and the rest had someone's grocery lists. I tore those out and started writing about her. Not what the news said, not what the medics thought, just what I saw. The way her voice shook, the way she held her chest, the way she asked me not to say her name. Every word felt heavier than the last. When I finished, I placed the notebook next to the fire and watched the edges curl from the heat. I didn't want to keep her story. I wanted to set it free. But as the paper burned, something inside me refused to let go. I grabbed the notebook before it turned to ash. Half of her words gone, the other half still there, black letters blurred by smoke. I kept it, maybe because, out here, ashes are all we ever get to keep. Days passed, and the world moved on. People walked above me, new faces, new troubles. But sometimes, when the wind came from the north, I could swear I heard her again. A whisper sliding between the cracks of the bridge. I told myself it was just the echo of the river, but part of me knew better. Then, one morning a cop came down the embankment. He was young, clean boots, shiny badge. He looked out of place under the bridge. "You've seen a woman down here, early 40s, dark hair, thin, name of Mara." I shook my head. "Can't say I have." He eyed me, like every word I spoke carried a lie. "You sure? She's been missing again." "Again. Yeah. They lost track of her after the hospital." He paused, studying the ashes near my fire. "You'll burn anything lately?" I smiled. "Just stories." He didn't like that answer. He handed me a card with a number and walked away, his boots echoing like warnings. When he left, I looked at the notebook. The burned corner had turned her name into something unreadable. That felt right. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't done talking to me. I sat by the fire, notebook in my lap, and waited. The wind picked up, carrying with it the smell of rain and diesel, the kind of smell that always comes before something important or terrible. Around midnight, I heard footsteps. Slow, careful. Someone was coming down the slope. I reached for the stick I kept nearby. Not for defense, just for courage. It wasn't a stranger. It was an old man I'd seen before, collecting bottles from the trash bins along the avenue. His cart squeaked behind him like a tired animal. "You've heard about the woman, huh?" he said, without looking at me. "What woman?" I asked. "The one the ambulance took. They say she died on the way. Heart failure, they said. But you know how they lie." I felt something sink inside me. "They said her name was Mara." He nodded. "That's the one. I knew her, long time ago, before she got lost. He sat down across from me, warming his hands near the fire. His nails were black with soot. She used to live up on Halstead. Had a husband. Nice guy too. Used to fix cars. Then one day he got sick. Cancer. She took care of him until the end. Sold her stuff to pay for the medicine. When he died, something in her snapped. He looked at me, eyes reflecting the firelight. They said she did something bad after that. But I never believed it. She was just tired. You know what tired can do to a person? I nodded. Yeah, I said softly. I do. He stayed a while longer, talking about things that didn't matter. When he left, I felt lighter and heavier at the same time. I thought about Maura's last words. Please, don't tell them my name. And I realized what she meant. It wasn't about shame. It was about ownership. Out here, your name isn't yours anymore. It belongs to whoever decides to say it out loud. I didn't see the old man again after that. Sometimes I think maybe he was never really there. Maybe he was just another echo of her story, finding its way back to me. The next few nights were restless. Every creak of the bridge sounded like a heartbeat. Every gust of wind carried a whisper that almost formed words. I started talking back, not because I was crazy, at least no more than usual, but because silence can eat you alive. Then, one evening, I saw a small paper bag placed near the edge of my camp. Inside it, a fresh loaf of bread and a note. The note said, in shaky handwriting, she said, "Thank you." No signature, no explanation. Just those 3 words. I looked around, but no one was there. Only the city watching, pretending not to care. I tore the bread in half, ate a piece, and tossed the rest into the fire. The smell filled the air, sweet and burning at the same time. That night, I dreamed of her. She was standing on the bridge, her hair blowing across her face, looking down at me. She wasn't sad anymore, just still, like she finally found the quiet she'd been chasing. When I awoke, the notebook was open beside me. The page that held her story was blank. The words had vanished, the ink bled away into the paper. I don't know if it was the moisture or something else. But maybe stories, like people, only stay as long as they're meant to. I closed the notebook and looked at the city stretching beyond the bridge. The same sirens, the same lights, the same promises of salvation that never quite reached the sidewalk. And I whispered, "Goodbye, Mara." The wind answered. Or maybe it didn't. I'll never really know. A few nights later, a fog rolled in from the river, thick enough to erase everything. The bridge above vanished into white. The city lights turned to ghosts. And even the sound of traffic felt distant, as if the world had pulled a blanket over itself to rest. That's how I remember the night she came back. It began with footsteps again. Slow, unsteady, echoing from the same alley where I first found her. For a second, I thought it was just memory walking toward me, dressed in someone else's shoes. But the sound grew louder, closer, until I saw a shadow take shape through the fog. My heart began to pound, not with fear, but with recognition. "Who's there?" I called out. The shadow stopped. Then a voice, soft and familiar. "You kept your promise." I froze. The fog shifted, and for a moment, I saw her. Mara, pale, thinner than before, but standing alive. Her hair clung damply to her face, and her coat looked the same, though torn at the sleeve. She stepped into the faint circle of firelight, and her eyes reflected it like water catching moonlight. You're supposed to be dead," I whispered. She smiled faintly. "That's what they want you to think." She sat down beside the fire, shivering. Her hands were bare, blue from the cold. "I don't have much time," she said. "They're looking for me again." "Who?" "The ones who said they'd save me. The ones with clean hands and dirty hearts." Her voice trembled as she stared into the flames. "I don't want to go back to the place where everything echoes. It's too quiet there. Too bright. They watch you through the mirrors. I didn't know what to say, I just listened. That's all people like me can offer, ears and silence. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded photograph. The edges were worn, the middle creased from being held too often. She handed it to me. It showed a man, bald, smiling weakly, sitting in a hospital bed, a woman beside him. Mara, younger, eyes full of life. He was my husband, she said. He used to fix radios, could make music out of broken wires. He died, believing I was strong enough to survive him. She looked up, tears catching the firelight. But I wasn't. She told me everything. How after his death, she started hearing his voice from the radio he'd repaired last. How the doctors called it grief. How the pills silenced the voice but killed the rest of her too. One day, she stopped taking them. One day, she started talking back to the voice. And that's when they came for her, the police, the nurses, the walls that whisper your name until it doesn't sound like yours anymore. I didn't escape, she said. I just walked out when nobody was watching. I thought maybe if I came back here I'd hear him again, but it's been so quiet. Her lips trembled. I thought I was done for good that night. Then you showed up. I looked at her, unsure whether to believe or fear her story. Maybe she was mad. Maybe she was telling the truth. Or maybe it didn't matter, because pain has its own logic. She leaned closer, lowering her voice to a whisper. They'll find me soon. But I need you to do something. What? She pulled a small metal pendant from her coat pocket, a locket shaped like a teardrop. It's silver tarnished. Inside, a tiny photograph of her husband, folded behind a lock of hair. When they come, she said, make sure this doesn't go with me. Burn it, promise me. I hesitated. Why? Her eyes filled with something that wasn't fear but knowing. Because I can't carry him where I'm going. I nodded. I promise. She smiled. It wasn't joy. It was relief. And for a while, we sat together in the silence again. Two people lit by the same small fire, trying to warm things that can't be warmed. Then the noise came. Sirens again, closer this time. But this wasn't an ambulance. It was a police car. Mara's body stiffened. They found me. She rose to her feet, swaying slightly, her shadow stretching tall against the wall. Run, I said. Go into the tunnels. I'll distract them. She shook her head. No more running. I just need to finish one thing. She stepped out from beneath the bridge, into the mist. The sirens grew louder, blue light washing over her silhouette. Two officers approached, shouting commands that got swallowed by the fog. I couldn't see their faces, just the outlines of guns drawn and a flash of metal. Mara raised her hands. Her voice carried through the night, calm, breaking and whole at once. I'm not who you think I am. For a second, everything stopped. The sound, the movement, even the wind. Then there was a shout, a single bright sound that split the air, and silence again. I ran toward the light, heart pounding like it wanted out of my chest. When I reached the street, she was on the ground, blood spreading slowly across the pavement, the fog glowing red around her. One officer knelt beside her, calling for medics. The other stood frozen, still pointing his gun at the sky, as if trying to shoot God. I fell to my knees beside her. Her eyes found mine. She was still breathing, barely. I took her hand. It was cold, lighter than air. She looked at me, and a weak smile crossed her lips. Did you burn it? She whispered. Not yet, I said. Then do it now. Please. I pulled the locket from my pocket and held it over the fire of a nearby trash can that someone had lit earlier in the alley. The silver turned black, the photograph inside curling into smoke. She watched it disappear and closed her eyes. Then she whispered the last words I'd ever hear from her. Tell him. I wasn't angry anymore, and she was gone. The medics came running a minute later, but I knew before they did that she wouldn't be coming back this time. They pushed me aside, did their work, covered her body, carried her to the ambulance again. The same red and blue lights flashing on the walls, the same sound that had taken her away once before. When they left, I sat there beside the burnt remains of the locket, watching the metal cool in the ashes. The fog began to lift, and for the first time in weeks, the stars peeked through tiny, distant, unbothered. I could almost hear her voice in the quiet. Nobody tells stories about people like us. So I spoke out loud. To no one and everyone. I just did. The city didn't answer. It never does. But I swear the wind felt warmer that night, like something unseen had finally stopped running. They came back the next morning. The same officers, different lights. The fog was gone, and the bridge looked smaller, weaker without it. They taped off the area, drew chalk lines on the pavement, took photographs of things they didn't understand. I sat by the fire again, not saying a word. One of them asked if I'd seen anything. I told him I hadn't. He looked tired enough to believe me. By noon the tape was gone, the people too. The world had already moved on to its next tragedy. The city has a short memory. That's how it stays alive. When it got quiet again, I walked to the spot where she had fallen. A small puddle had formed in the crack of the sidewalk, catching the reflection of the bridge above. I could see the sky in it, grey, endless, pretending to care. I dropped the burnt piece of silver into that puddle and watched it sink. For a moment, I thought I saw her face in the ripples. Then it was gone. I don't know how long I stood there. Maybe an hour, maybe a lifetime. When I finally sat back by my fire, I opened the notebook again. The last page was still blank, waiting. I picked up the broken pencil I kept in the pocket of my coat and wrote a single sentence. She found peace in the noise of the sirens. Then I closed it. Some stories aren't meant to be finished. Days passed, and the world slipped back into its routine of forgetting. The same cars, the same cold, the same faces hurrying past the bridge. But every night, when the city quieted, I could still feel her presence sitting beside me, not as a ghost, but as memory. Something softer than guilt, heavier than forgiveness. Sometimes when I close my eyes, I still hear her last words. Tell him I wasn't angry anymore. And I wonder if that message ever reached wherever it was meant to go. I like to think it did, because maybe peace isn't found in heaven or in hospitals. Maybe it's found in the space between one breath and the next, in the silence after you finally stop running. I've met people out here who believe we all get what we deserve. I've also met people who deserve everything good and get nothing. And then there are the rest of us living somewhere in between, just trying to make it through another night without losing the last piece of ourselves that still remembers what love felt like. I still keep that notebook, not because it matters to anyone else, but because it reminds me that even the forgotten deserve to be remembered. Her name isn't written anywhere inside it, but I don't need it. Sometimes a story is stronger when it's faceless. I think about her husband sometimes, the man in the photograph. I wonder if he ever forgave her, if he's somewhere waiting with the same patience she carried in her eyes, if there's a place where the broken things finally fit. The city lights blink above me like restless stars, and the sound of the highway hums like a lullaby. I sit close to the fire and let the warmth crawl back into my fingers. The night smells of rain again. It always does when something ends. And I talk to her, quietly, like she's sitting just beyond the light. I kept my promise, Mara. They never said your name again, but I did what you wanted. I told your story. The flames crackle in response, and for a moment it almost sounds like laughter. Or maybe that's just the wind playing tricks again. People think the streets are all noise and chaos, but they're not. When you live out here long enough, you start hearing the spaces between the sounds, the breaths the world forgets to take. That's where the truth lives, not in the headlines, not in the prayers, in the silence. I've learned that sometimes the streets don't take you, they keep you. They hold you until you're ready to remember who you were before everything went wrong. Maybe that's why I'm still here. Maybe that's why I stay under this bridge, telling stories to a city that doesn't listen. Because someone has to remember. Someone has to make sure the lost aren't gone completely. I watch the last ember of my fire die, and for a second, I think I see her again standing where the light meets the dark, smiling. Not as she was, but as she should have been. Whole. The wind moves through the cracks of the bridge, soft and low, like a voice trying to say something gentle. I close my eyes and let it speak. Maybe it's her. Maybe it's just the city breathing. Either way, I listen. And as the night settles in, I whisper the only words that still make sense. My name is Walter Gray, and I'm the voice on the sidewalk. The fire fades. The sound of traffic returns. And somewhere between the noise and the quiet, another story waits.